Alright, this is a demonstration on how to design a digital denture in Exocad using the full denture module. And remember, this isn't the only way to design a denture. You could also use a partial denture module, which has some benefits, but for right now, let's keep it simple. We're going to use the dummy data that Exocad provides, so just some demo data that's already in occlusion. We're going to have an upper scan, a lower scan, and a bite rim. It's going to be ideal records, so it's going to be a very simple and straightforward case to plan with here. When you load this, you'll see in the notes that there's a YouTube link from Exocad. That takes you to their own 30-some minute tutorial, so feel free to watch that in your own time as well. It gets you through the basics. It's a little slow, but it's a good way to at least see what all the steps are. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started here. So we loaded our demo data. And anytime you're doing a denture, the first thing you want to do is make sure all of your data is in your proper folder. So if we look down here, we go to Open in Explorer, and this is our data. We want to make sure that our STL files are all in this Exocad folder. That way, if we move the case, or if you have to re-upload the case, or redo the case, you have all of your data already, okay? Anyways, let's get started. So I'm going to close this out. We're going to go into, okay, so here we are asking for our files. Now, if you look here at the top of every pop-up box from Exocad, we'll have where it says at the top upper jaw, low jaw scan. So that's what it's asking for. It's very straightforward in what it's asking for. So we want the jaw scan. And we generally want to keep everything named, something that's very easy to remember and very explanatory. So I prefer to name with the patient's name, upper jaw, patient's name, lower jaw, patient's name, bite rim, or aesthetic plate. So in this situation, we'll go ahead and select upper jaw, because that's what it's asking for. Now it says lower jaw, load the jaw scan. So the first thing is asking for a lower jaw scan. We'll choose that. If we had a pre-op for the lower, it would say lower jaw, load pre-op. In this situation, the bite rim, since that isn't specific to an upper or lower jaw, is for both combined. We're going to go ahead and choose this file, which is also named aesthetic plate. And now we have our case loaded in here. We have our upper, our lower, and our bite rim. So here we are looking at our lower jaw. I prefer to have it facing downwards like this. I feel like it makes it easier in the future if you're dealing with implants. If you're not dealing with implants, it doesn't make a difference. So we load it downwards. We want to make sure that we're not looking at the underside of the model. We are looking at the top of that model. Now here's a little hint. Say this thing came in upside down. Things came in upside down. And I'm like, hold on, this is showing me red, when the reality is the beige that should be the top, it's actually inverted. We can see I'm looking at the underside of the model here. And we want the underside to be red, where in this situation it's backwards. So we can easily flip this around. This is useful if you take an impression and you need to flip it into a model. So we can go to expert mode. We can right click on our lower jaw and hit edit mesh. Once we're editing, that's the side we want to be the bottom, this side we want to be the top. So really we just need to invert everything around. So we can right click, we're going to hit show triangle orientation. Now we can see it's upside down, or inside out I should say. After we hit invert triangle, or after we hit show triangle orientation, we now have this other option that says invert triangle orientation. We hit that now, and now we can see it flipped it around for us. All we have to do is hit OK, and now our models are right side up. We go back to our wizard, we can see we're back to our sun model, and now it has it correct, where the underside is red, and the top side is, in this situation, beige, but it could be full color also, just not red. We'll hit next. Now it's asking for a model analysis, and it's going to ask us if we want a basic analysis or a full analysis. I always prefer the basic because the reality is I feel like this analysis never gets things to where I want anyways, so I really just fly through and I ignore it, and then I just start over at the next step. That's also where the partial module can come in handy, because a partial module, instead of using the full denture module, you get to skip all of this and you just get straight to designing. So I personally think this is a waste of time for me. I'll hit model analysis. It's going to ask me for how I want to do my bite rim. And in this situation, can't seem to move my window around here, so here we go. We're going to define our occlusal plane by 3 points. Now the demo data, it gives you a perfect bite rim to work with, so this is going to be stupid easy in this situation. We're going to define this by 3 points. That's the way I prefer to do it. We're going to click the left point, the right point, and then the center. So the left point, patient's left, and then patient's right, and then the center. We'll move that right there. We can hit apply, and it's going to draw a plane for us. If this was off, you could drag one of these down, hit apply again, and it would try to correct that plane. Alternatively, you can, in the locked areas here, unlock everything, and now I can just move that right up and down. If I move that right down, hit apply, it does the same thing. I can bring it back to 0, hit apply, and it leveled everything out for me again. Say I have my bite rim, but I know I want to lower my incisal edge, I can lock everything again, and then I can just drop everything by, say, 2 millimeters, hit apply, and it moves everything down for me 2 millimeters. You don't have to use this in the next step. It just makes it a little easier to see where your incisal edge is going to be. So again, I don't really worry too much about this because it doesn't make a big difference for me. So we'll hit OK. Now we'll move on to the next. Now it's going to ask for your incisal papilla. We're going to hit the center of it right here. Now it's going to ask for your tuberosities. You don't have to go in order. It already will figure out left and right for you. So if I do this backwards, you can see that the right is on the patient's right, the left is on the patient's left. If I flip these around, it kind of self-corrects itself. So you don't have to worry about doing that one in order. But we'll go ahead and hit the tuberosities right back there. Right there. From this incisal papilla and your tuberosities, it's going to automatically calculate your midline, which is already right there, and it seems to be pretty well enough for us. Now it's going to ask to mark your first rugae, and there we go. And now on the bottom, it's going to ask for defining your premolar positions. Pull this here and here, right around that buccal frenum. Now it's going to ask for your retromolar pads, and we'll go ahead and mark those as well. Again, you can rotate this around to see if you need to. It's going to ask to mark your midline, and in this situation, we're actually slightly off here. And let's see if we can get that to correct itself, but again, it doesn't really matter. From those points you just gave it, it's going to calculate where the ridge is, and it picked a good one here. But again, remember, this is dummy data, so it's always going to have this right. It's going to guesstimate where your molars should be. Now we'll hit OK. Now our model analysis is done. It got rid of the bite rim. We just don't need to see that anymore. It's still there, which is hidden right now. We can always still show it, but, excuse me, but we don't need to right now. So let's just go ahead and move on. It's going to say you don't have enough space for second molars. Do we want to place second molars? I'm going to hit, you know what, go ahead and place them anyways. We'll figure it out. There we go. And let's hide our bite rim. There we go. So now we can see the teeth that it picked. And it's automatically set us up into a little bit of a crossbite. So we're going to make some changes here. I always like to use scalable teeth because I like to make the teeth to whatever size I want. So over here, if you scroll to the top, you can choose scalable, and where you can see the posteriors are scalable, lingualized. And if I hit this arrow, I can scroll to the top, and I can see I have a scalable, lingualized option. I could also purposely pick extra small teeth, but again, I don't like that. I like to always pick something that's scalable so we can customize it to what we need. If we don't like the shapes of the teeth, we could also change the shapes of the teeth in the next stage here. But let's go ahead and stick with this here. And let's go ahead and continue. Now you can see it kind of reshaped some stuff. It reset everything. It's hardly ever going to get it this right for you in the future. So don't expect this. You're going to end up with some giant posteriors and tiny anteriors, and that's just the way it's going to be. It's going to require some manual corrections, and we'll see that in a future tutorial where I will use actual patient data and not this dummy textbook data, and you'll see that it doesn't always turn out like this. In fact, it rarely ever does, for me at least. The reason I was saying there's not enough room for a second molar is we can see this second molar starting to come up on this back ridge. And that just tells us that's probably too far. Dentures really shouldn't start to ride up onto that ridge back there. It should stop well short of that. You're going to end up with a lot of bite issues back there. You're going to dislodge these dentures a little sooner just because they're prematurely hitting on them, and it's just not going to be as stable. So if you have your dentures extending way back there, you might want to cut those second molars out of there. So now in this view, we have our placement of the teeth. We have our simple movement or our chain movement. Now the simple movement versus chain movement, the chain links everything together, so if you move one, it moves the other next to it. As long as there's a green dot above it. Anything with a green dot is free to move in the chain mode. So if I have chain mode right now, and I choose chain tooth, I can pull this and you can see they all start to move. If I go back to simple, I can undo that. Let's say I go back to chain and I just choose a single tooth. I can move that single tooth, but you can see the other teeth are starting to collapse around there. It's keeping things in contact because I have that checked to keep things in contact. But what if I go back to starting there? If I have these in green, I can click that. Now I can make these red. And if they're red, they don't move. I can move this one because I'm manually clicking it, but you can see the ones adjacent to it, they're not budging because they're locked. So say I unlock this. Now if I move this one, even though that's red, I'm moving it directly myself, so it's still going to move, and anything that's green is scaling. And since this is locked, that's the last thing that'll move. So it won't change. These other ones over here on the other side of the red, they can't move right now. So that's how the chain mode works. If you, let's go back and reset everything here so we can get back to the beginning. There we go. Some of these other modes here, so I use chain a lot. Posteriors locked relation. What that means is they're locked. You can't budge these posteriors. They are already set based on that model analysis where, based on the patient's anatomy, that's where these teeth should be, so it doesn't let you change them. I don't really like that because I like to have everything as scalable as possible because I like to customize everything. And in the partial module, you don't have this option. In the partial module, everything's freely adjustable. But you know what? You can just go right in here and change opposite as a pair. I do like that mode because now whatever I do to the top, the bottom will follow. And we can see that all these posteriors, the second molar up to the first premolar, they're all green. But my canine's locked and my disc back here is locked. So that means I can move these posteriors and they move as a group. But they aren't going to move anything anterior to it. If I go back to my chain now, the other thing is upper lower separate. Now I can move the top without moving the bottom. So that's what all those individual modes mean. And sometimes you got to use all of them, sometimes you don't use any of them, but it's good to know how the teeth are going to move, just so you don't screw up your occlusion once you get everything dialed in pretty well. The way I personally like to do it is I like to get my anterior teeth in the right spot with the right size, and then I set my posterior teeth to match. If I have enough room for a second molar, great. If I don't, I drop the second molar. There's ways in the partial module to also, keep 2 molars and only 1 premolar if you want. You don't really need to get that fancy with it. That's a different tutorial. So let's go ahead and maybe mess things up a little bit because there's not really much to do over here. Now we have a pretty messed up bite. We can see what happened here. Looks like the predator. The reason this set up teeth like this, I went back through the model analysis and I redid some of the points. Your retromolar pads are pretty straightforward. Your tuberosities, your centrals, they're all going to be pretty accurate. The reason that this gave me a proposal like this is because of this blue dot, which is where I said I want my molar to be, and this green dot, which is where I said I want my premolar to be. So it basically puts the first molar above the blue dot, puts the first premolar above the green dot. Whatever space it has, it fills in the rest of the teeth. In this situation, it made them massive. And we can see that it made the anteriors much smaller because these anteriors now need to fit between the green dots. And then we can see on the opposite side, again, we have large posteriors, small anteriors. When you're dealing with a patient's case, sometimes it's tough to kind of eyeball where these teeth should go. And oftentimes you end up with something like this, then you just got to redo it all by hand. So let's go ahead and do that. First things though, we're going to choose our denture teeth, and we're going to choose everything to be scalable. There we go, scalable, anterior upper, scroll all the way to the top. You can see this is generic denture extra small, generic denture small, generic denture scalable. That's the one we want. Now I will go ahead and hit reload those shapes, and we will hit next. And now we can see we need to do a lot of work here. So basically, in the simple mode, if we use scale, I can go ahead and just make these posterior teeth smaller until they line up with about the same general size as anteriors. Don't worry that they're all small. We're going to make them all bigger as a group here in a second. So there we go. Now, those posteriors are proportional to our anteriors. Even though they're all small, at least everything's proportional now. Even though it gave us that funky proposal where we made big posteriors, tiny anteriors, now we've kind of leveled everything out. Let's go to chain mode real quick. And the only reason I clicked chain mode is just so it locked everything together and connected everything. So now I'll go back to simple mode, and I just want to make these posteriors just a little bit bigger because it resized things for me just a little bit. There we go. Now all of our teeth are in the right general proportions to each other. Maybe we'll tweak it just a touch. There we go. Now I want to make all of them bigger, so I'm going to come over here to the bottom left where it says move all simultaneously. And now I can grab this and I can just scale them all together, and they're all going to grow together for me. And let's say that's a good size. Don't worry that they're not in their arch. We'll get to that here. Again, these teeth are way anterior right now, so we can also simply move these further back. I'm not worried about that crossbite. We're going to correct all that. And again, the reason I'm showing you all this is when you start to set teeth, you're going to realize that it always so gives you these funky proposals, and you need to know how to correct that. So let's go ahead and figure this out. I like my anterior size right there. The posteriors will end up in the right spot. So let's go ahead and get started with positioning everything. What I like to do is keep everything as separate. And the posterior will keep it locked together. The anteriors will flip-flop. In chain mode, we are going to move opposite of the pair. And now you can see I have my discs where I can adjust the posterior, because if I locked the relation, I can't move my posteriors, but I need to because they're not in the right spot right now. So let's go ahead and move opposites as a pair. And what we'll do here is sometimes it's easier if you look at it from one versus the other. And I'm just going to look at just the, let's just look at the low. Why can I not move? Oh, yeah, this is stupid, sorry. Your chain mode respects what's in your simple mode, so yeah, I got to go to move. I was in scale mode still, so let's go back to here. Let's keep our opposites as a pair, and now we're going to go ahead and move. Let's go ahead and keep our posteriors locked. There we go. We're going to move this so our molar is above our blue dot, which is where we said we wanted our molar. And right about there is good. We have the occlusion going through our occlusal line that we had predetermined earlier. We'll bring this up as well. And now our molars are in the right spot. What we'll do now is bring all of these teeth back into the proper arch. If we look at our uppers, let's go ahead and set that. Now my upper teeth are pretty close to where I want. I think I need to bring them in a little bit more and in a little bit more. If I had looked at it here, I can see that this arch just isn't in line. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that arch in line to get it above that ridge. I'm not too stressed about the anterior shape quite yet, but now we can see that our uppers are in a pretty good position relative to our bone. I might actually want my anteriors to be slightly bigger, so what I'm going to do is lock my posteriors. Now I'm going to bring these anteriors forward, which makes them a little bit bigger. And it didn't change the size of my posteriors. Now I can unlock those posteriors. But we have a crossbite we got to fix. So How do I fix that? I can't move them both together like that. I need to go ahead and change it to upper lower separate. I don't want to move my posterior bite because it's locked in correctly. So let's lock the posteriors. And now I can bring my lower anteriors and just bring them down, and they're just going to shorten up and get smaller, and they're going to automatically kind of fix themselves under there. And we can see our bite no longer has that cross bite. We're in a pretty decent position right now. There's still some tweaks we got to change here. We can see our midline is slightly off. So if I wanted to move all of them at once, the best thing to do is go to simple mode, move all simultaneously, and we'll just slide it all over a little bit. And now our midline is right where it needs to be. We can see our occlusion pretty close. Let's drop that down just a bit. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now I have to correct some of these over here. So in chain mode, we can see our angles are just a little bit off. Our canine looks tucked in a little bit. Our posteriors are just a little bit funky. So let's go ahead and set opposite as a pair. I'm going to move one tooth at a time. And we're going to unlock all of our posteriors. And now I can see I'm moving the upper and lower together because they're already paired up in occlusion. And I can go ahead and move these individual sets to where I want. I don't like this right here, but personally I think that looks a little bit better for me. Maybe even a little bit more upright. I don't like flared posterior teeth and dentures. I think it looks very fake because your premolars just don't flare out that much in real life, so denture teeth shouldn't either if we want them to look aesthetic. So now that I've uprighted my posterior teeth, my midline, you can use a little bit of tweaking. But now we can see our molars are right above our blue dot. My canine ended up being above my teal dot there, but that's just because I put the dot in the wrong spot. Had I put the dot in the correct spot, it would have actually picked better sizing of teeth. But again, when you don't have any teeth to go with, you're kind of just guessing some of this stuff. And for me personally, I need to just have it all laid out first, and then I just correct it instead of trying to guess it in the first place. Because patients' teeth aren't going to be perfect models. If we look here, we can see we have a little bit of a discrepancy. The patient's left side is way out there compared to the right side. So let's just go ahead and kind of correct that. There we go. I brought that down. Now if we look at the lowers, that should have matched up because I had upper lower as a pair. It lined everything up for me. Everything looks pretty good. My only real concern right now is this lower canine. I think it just tucked in a little too much, but it's in occlusion the way I want. And we have a little bit of a heavy occlusion right here. So if I want to fix that, I gotta unlock my upper lowers. And now I can separate these just a little bit to fine-tune that bite. There we go. That's our tooth setup. Usually it doesn't take that long. Took a little longer right there, mainly because I was talking the whole time. So let's hit next. After our tooth setup is done, it's going to save all these teeth in that position. A more advanced case is to go ahead and export your teeth positions, which we can do by hitting save and export to tooth models. And what that did is it took every single one of those teeth and exported it. So if I wanted to restart this case, I could import those teeth, and I don't have to reset the case. I don't need to reset the teeth anymore. In the denture module, I don't really like to mess with the freeforming because you should be able to get pretty perfect occlusion that doesn't require interproximal reduction, doesn't require any reduction whatsoever. I'm not even worried if any of these teeth were into the base because in a future step, it's going to correct that anyways. So now we're ready to create some gingiva, and overall, these teeth might be a little bit small. I'm not worried about that right now. I think they probably should be slightly bigger, but let's not worry about it. Or you know what? Let's just go ahead and worry about it. Let's fix that. We'll move all simultaneously. We'll scale all together. Let's make them all a little bit bigger. And let's move them all a little bit posterior. You know what? That's probably going to look a lot better. So that was a quick fix. I have a little bit of a cant right there, but again, let's just move on. I'm not going to change anything here. This is just like if you were designing teeth for crowns. This is where you would adjust your cusp tips, fine tune your occlusion. If I don't like, the bulkiness of this area right here, this is where I would come in and I would just, flatten some of these teeth if I just don't like the contours of it. This is why I like designing on Exocad much better than stock card teeth, and I like fully scalable teeth as well, because you can customize this patient's occlusion, you can customize things as much as you want. We'll hit next. Now, it's asking me to go ahead and adjust my occlusion. I'm not worried about it right now. Now, the fun part of the denture is setting the denture base. What you first need to do is set your wax up undercut. So we're going to tilt this just a little bit, and we're going to apply our wax up. I don't change any of the parameters for how long that undercut is or offset we need. I just leave everything as default. Based on this patient's arch, they have a little bit of an undercut right there. If I reorient it a little bit more, I can hit set insertion direction from view to the side again, and let's see if we can eliminate a little bit of that undercut so this patient doesn't get right up there. It will block out that undercut, but it really end up with is not enough suction in that area because it wasn't tight enough against the tissue. And there we go. Now we have a pretty good adaptation. Let's go ahead and next. It's going to tell me to do the same thing for the bottom. So what it has done now, and I'm just going to hit apply. It's taking gas and it's creating a virtual accent bottom. That virtual bottom is what it does all the gingival design to. So now that I've created this gray virtual bottom, and if I look in my list of there we go. If I look at my list, we're going to see that these jaw scans are no longer going to be relevant because it has already made a virtual bottom. Let's skip to the next step real quick. There we go. This denture-based bottom. These are what it's designing the cast off of. At this point, the jaw scans no longer matter. I can go into expert mode, I can move these jaw scans. It doesn't matter anymore. It's already created as a virtual bottom. That's what it's designing everything off of. So in the future webinar, we'll see if we take a reline of an impression, we need to delete this virtual bottom for it to be able to start over again. If we don't delete this, it won't reline it correctly because it's building everything off of this bottom here. Now it's asking me to design my top. This is where we literally are just drawing our top. Again, they have everything pre-scored. It's just a whole lot easier on this than in real life. But we're just going to go through quickly and trace the shape of our denture. If we scroll in, we can grab these green dots. You know what, we're going to bring this back here because they have a cutout for a posterior dam already on here, and that's what we can see into that cast. This is the extent of your denture. So when we have these frenum holes, you want to make sure you accommodate those. So let's pull the dot above that, and then we can bring another one to tighten in around there. This way, we have some space allocated for those frenums so we don't get those sore spots. And this is for our labofrenum here. So let's go ahead and create some relief. And if I pull that, I can also add another dot just by clicking on the line. That way I can tighten things up. There we go. So that is going to be the outline of our denture. We'll head next. Now it's going to set those teeth. It's going to create a denture base for us. But before I start to tweak that denture base, I'm going to have to do the bottom. This is saying, hold on, you want to mill this? Your denture base, or based on your milling machine, you can only mill 35 millimeters. You're going to end up with a denture that's taller than that. What do you want to do? I'm going to say don't worry about it because we're going to print this anyways. So I'm just going to hit ignore and continue. Now I have to create the base for my bottom. Same story before. Let's just go ahead and start tracing. And as I come here, if I click multiple times, I can go around that quicker so I don't have to go back in and start to tweak everything. Again, as with everything, if you do it right the first time, it saves you much effort later on. Just keep clicking through here. My least favorite part of the Exocad tutorials directly from Exocad is how loud their mouse click is. So hopefully this mouse click isn't terribly loud and obnoxious. If it is, I'm sorry. There we go, there we go. Let's go and correct. And a little bit further down. And this isn't a demonstration of creating perfection in these cases. This is more so you can understand the workflow and get better at the workflow. And then you can fine-tune and spend more time on your own with these cases. There we go. All right. So now you can see it's virtually setting those teeth in there. We're going to end up with some pink gingiva here in a second. And then we're going to freeform that gingiva. So we'll let it go ahead and create that gingiva. There we go. There's our lower, there's our upper. Now it's asking me, do I want to set connectors between these teeth? You can see those yellow connectors right there. If you are going to be printing a monoblock where it's just one solid piece of plastic, you don't need any connectors. If you're printing teeth, it is a good idea to still print them connected. So even if they print or mill, at least it's all in one piece. I like to take the smaller connector here. I make them small because, again, this isn't for rigidity or strength. It's really just to keep it from breaking as you're working with it. Once it's fused together, they're all locked in anyways. Let's go ahead and apply that cross-section shape, and it'll be nice and small, out of the way. There we go. Let's hit next. And let's go ahead and look at our draw scans there. There we go. And now we can see, if we turn True Smile on, it'll make it in pink, and we can see what our gingiva is going to look like. Don't worry about all this sticking through. It's going to adapt that later, so do not worry about that. If you have any sharp spikes sticking out of this, that needs to get corrected, or else it won't adapt correctly. But in this situation, don't worry about all of this. This will fix itself later, so don't worry about it, okay? What we want to really do in this stage is just make sure we don't have any gaps between our teeth, and it fill this in really well in this situation. Usually, it doesn't do it quite that well. Usually, you know, it ends up leaving you some spaces like this. And that's probably because I manipulate the teeth a lot more typically, but you'll usually end up with some spaces in the embrasures. So I like to bring my number 5 tool, which is the entire Edit Denture base tool, and I can move a lot of this gingiva all at one time to put things in the right spot. If you use the number 4 tool, which is the Denture base parts, it does the same thing, but just on a smaller scale. So manipulate this, whatever makes it looking good for you. Just like that. Under freeforming, you can do some festooning here. I don't go crazy with the festooning, but you know, in this situation, we probably have a little bit too much here, so we'll take our remove tool and let's go ahead and remove some of this stuff right above our laterals. And then we can also take our number 2 tool, which is our smoothing, and let's go ahead and smooth that out. Sometimes we want a little bit more defined anatomy on our lowers, and it's easier to see that anatomy if we hide this minimum thickness right here. And now we can, you know, take our remove tool, we can take a small brush size, a little less strength here, and then, you know, you can start to remove some of this tissue in between these teeth to make it look like these teeth are more prominent in the bone. We can also take our remove tool and kind of go around our frenum like that. We can use this to give ourselves a little bit more of a canine eminence also. I'm using an ergo mouse here, which makes it a little hard to control these fine movements, so don't worry about how this looks. This is just for demonstration. If we wanted a little bit more of a gingival roll, we can come here and we can add to our gingival roll. It might work easier to see if I have it in yellow mode. And you can see that I'm adding a bit of a gingival roll right there. See, this is a good time to go ahead and tweak this to however you want for, you know, whatever aesthetics you want here, because this is all strictly aesthetic here. I mean, there's probably some functional portion of, you know, food escapement, but it's mostly aesthetic. Let's go ahead and raise our brush, and now we'll just kind of buff out some of those sharp adjustments there. Make it look a little bit more natural. Again, not perfect down here. We can see, you know, a little bit messy in some of these areas, but this is where you spend your time to get all of it corrected and looking really good. Exocad just isn't that great in festooning. I wish the tools were a little bit better. But short of taking this to a third-party app, which I think is kind of a waste of time usually, I think this is going to be as good as we're going to get. But again, you can spend a lot of time really refining this, but for this tutorial, I don't want to waste your time on this. What we can then do is visualize our bottom thickness just to make sure we don't have any really thin areas. In this situation, the yellow is 2 millimeters. And anything right now that is in blue is less than 2.16, which is what my number here is. So let's call it 2.1. Anything blue is under 2.1 millimeters thick. So we're a little bit thin back here in the posterior. And you know what, that might be an area where something might break. And this is an area where we can afford to get a little bit thicker. So let's just go ahead and grab our add tool, and we can actually just thicken this area up back here and give it some strength through the palate, because this is a pretty high stress area. Because I'm sure all of you know, when maxillary dentures break, it's in the palate. It's in the palate, or it's right in the front. So these thin areas, they can be a liability for you in the future if you leave them too thin. If we look at our lower, pretty thick in the central, and that's usually where we're going to get a break. A lot of lowers aren't breaking the retromolar pad area. But we don't want it too thick down here, or else it's going to feel real funny to them. There we go. Now it's going to ask me to adapt the denture base to the teeth. What it's doing now is it's going to create a tooth pocket, because it knows I plan to print these teeth, print the base separately, and fuse them together. So we need a little bit of a space. And in this situation, I leave it at 0.3, and that's worked quite well for me. Your printer might need, 0.5, or 0.03 is my spacing here. You might need a little bit more space. If you're printing it in a TrueDent system, you want 0 spacing. So all of this depends on how you plan to manufacture that. That's how you design these offsets. I'm not going to change anything right now. I'm just going to hit apply, and what it's doing now is it's cutting this denture to match the teeth and to this base. So we're just going to give it a minute, and it takes some time. And that's why I told you not to worry about this part of it before, because it's going to handle it right now for you. I really think that took a lot longer because I had those connectors in there. Now it's going to ask me to do the same thing for the lower, because you can see the lower hasn't been adapted yet where the top has. So let's go ahead and apply for lower, and it's going to do the same thing all over again, this time for the bottom. It cut fine, so now it should finish this process just fine. And I think, again, most of this is probably from those connectors. I probably screwed something up. Oftentimes, I don't print with connectors at all. I just have the teeth connected. And with those connectors, I don't know if you noticed, but I had a lot of spacing above them, which is not a great design. I should have had these connectors with no embrasure space above them, so this one solid piece can just drop right into the denture base, so that my denture base doesn't need to try to wrap around these connectors in a funky manner, because that is pretty awkward connector design there. So don't do it like this. If you're going to do this, just don't even bother doing the connectors, because this is a bad design for that. There we go. Now our denture is designed. Now let's go ahead and look at see what we have here. Let's hide our scans. There's our upper lower denture, and we can see right here, this thing's pretty nasty looking, isn't it? At this stage, we can right click in expert mode. We can right click and we can scroll down. And why don't we just go ahead and hit freeforming? If we hit freeforming, it's going to have us form our teeth, but that's not what I want. I need to freeform my adaptive denture base. So I'm going to right click again. Now look down here. It says freeform adaptive denture base, or adaptive base. Now I'm tweaking this part. So I can take my smooth tool now, and I don't want to get near the teeth because I need to make sure that that part doesn't change on us. I'm going to change, keep bottom boundary fixed, so I can actually start to smooth things out right here. There we go. And you can see right here, I can start to smooth things up. Because either you do it now for a few seconds, or you're doing it later anyways. So again, so you're spending time now or spend it later, I prefer to do it now. And that's how a denture base will cut. You see you left some room for those connectors, and if I show my anatomics, without my denture base, this is what we're going to end up looking like. Here's our base, And I'm sorry, those teeth actually aren't the merged teeth. Let me get the merged teeth showing here. It hasn't shown me the merged option here. So let's merge and save restorations. I might look here and see, okay, why does this gingiva look open here? And that's because those connectors have to slide in through there. There we go. Now we've merged everything. So, if I hide everything here, these are my merged bridges. You can see they have those connectors. And the denture base has been designed for those connectors to slide through, which means they have to be open on the top for those teeth to seat. At this stage, we can go back to Wizard, and if we want to do a try-in, we can hit continue or generate and save monoblock try-in now, and it will merge all these also into a monoblock. If we look at our tools and our project and Explorer, these are all the files that we have saved for this particular case. We have all of our tooth models. If we organize by date, that's going to be a little easier to see. We have all of our tooth models. We have our lower bridge, our upper bridge, our lower gingiva, our upper gingiva. If I said save a monoblock, it would also make a monoblock for me. I'll hit continue without, and now we'll wrap up our case. We will hit I'm done. This case is finished. I hope that helped you out some. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.